There are no secrets forever. And again, both in that profession and in my current profession, there's a lot of parallels. I see people at their worst. I see people at their most intimate. And I've seen enough people and enough things play out to know that things that happen in secret never stay secret.
Hey, Flip Your Script friends, it's Kristi Piehl. Get ready for a Flip Your Script first. This actually hasn't ever happened before. So here's why today is so unique. We asked Chey Eisenman, better known on Twitter as Chey Cab, to share her story about going from a taxi driver to the owner of a luxury car service. She and her associates drive around celebrities and executives, and let me tell you, she hears some things. Well, Chey said she'd be on the podcast, but she actually is ready to share a different Flip Your Script story, one that is deeply personal and she hasn't ever talked about publicly. Chey, welcome to the podcast.
Kristi, good to see you again.
I know you because I've been in the back of your car quite a bit, and you're amazing at what you do. And we talk quite a bit, and I felt like I knew most of your story, and you're pretty prolific on social media. You have an amazing Twitter following. You use the media really well for your business, which we've talked about. You break stories all the time. You hear things that other people don't hear. So long before trends hit, you're already tweeting about it. And then when I asked you to do this, you said yes. And you said, but actually there's something that I haven't talked about that I'm ready to talk about. So before you were a business owner, before you had the cab, before that, there's this other part. So what are you ready to share? This is weird for me, Chey, because I couldn't even prep for this. So it's like, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so my Flip Your Script story actually starts in the early days of 2005, so roughly 17 years ago. In the first days of 2005, I left a partner that I would call perhaps the love of my life. I don't know, at least, up until this point. And so that was very, very difficult. And so there was that significant thing going on underneath. But I also had decided to walk away from my life as a call girl. And in my ideal scenario, I would have had a wonderful nest egg and maybe a job lined up or something, right? I would have had an exit strategy or a plan. But in this case, I woke up one day and decided I couldn't do it anymore. And so I would say roughly 30 days from the day I decided I couldn't do it anymore, I walked away. So, yeah.
Okay, wait, for people who don't, call girl is one of these terms that means different things to different people. So tell us about your work.
So I said call girl because I feel like most people know what that is. If I had said provider or GFE or any of those terms, people probably wouldn't know. But basically I was a high-end sex worker, more of a girlfriend experience, if that helps. So you I think for people who are, I don't know, fill in the word, naive or whatever, you had a committed relationship. Yep. Healthy,
committed relationship, and you were a sex worker.
Yep. And he knew going in, and he had to agree that, he understood that was, so we had some agreements there. But, with anything in life, you do something for a while and maybe you see it for what it is, or maybe it's no longer working for you. Or in some cases, people are trapped into situations and they need a way out, and they may not be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel or understand the best path forward to get out of a situation like that. So when I decided to do it, I had a criminal record. I had a petty misdemeanor of prostitution on my record, which even though it's the same level as, say, a traffic citation, there's the stigma, right? So, and it's a very serious stigma. People see that and, have a reaction and assume lots of things about you, whether it's true or not true. And so even just something as simple as a petty misdemeanor of prostitution can keep a woman entrapped in that life for their whole life, or for much longer than they should be, because they're afraid of people not opening doors because of that. Yeah.
You talked about the stigma, so I want to ask you something else about that. So there is this other stigma, not just the prostitution stigma, but also the, when you say sex worker, a lot of people feel like that isn't a choice that someone would make. And to be clear, this is a choice. This is your profession. This is something that you pre-criminal record, that this wasn't something you were forced into or trafficked or anything like that. This was what you wanted to do.
I will say that how I got into it wasn't just me waking up one day and deciding I wanted to be a call girl. Circumstances led me down that path, and there's a whole story. But then eventually I became what you would know as like an independent sex worker, where I worked for myself and I made great money and saw great clients. And so it was a much more privileged scenario than how it began. But it began in kind of an unfortunate, like the way that some people fall into that sort of thing. So that was kind of, there was that beginning, but there wasn't that end, if you will.
Got it. Thank you.
So, yeah. So I had like $15,000 in my bedside table, and I had this criminal record, and I decided to abruptly like change my life. And I had a 4-year gap on my resume. And so I wasn't sure what my options were. So before I had left my relationship, I had told my very wonderful but uptight rule following boyfriend that I was going to just pick a career out of the hat, basically. And I was going to cold call for a job. And he said, "Oh, you can't do that. You have to have a cover letter. You have to have a resume. And I don't know how you're going to do this. You have a gap on your resume and you have a criminal record." And, he just didn't see how this could be possible. And so part of me wanted to prove to him that you can go outside the box and still achieve your goals without following the rules that society says you have to follow. So I decided, not because I was interested in it, because it was just something that I pulled out of a hat. I decided to see if I could get a job in media sales. I figured anybody could do that, right? So I cold called the Star Tribune, City Pages, the Minneapolis Business Journal, and a few others. And basically like figured out who I needed to call and started leaving voicemails and sending emails and that sort of thing. Now, these things, as you know, like they don't happen overnight. So as time started to pass, and it wasn't a lot of time. Like we're talking now we're into March, now we're into April. But when you only have 15 grand in your bedside table and rent is so much and bills are so much, well, that money goes pretty quickly. And I had downgraded my life significantly to kind of prepare myself for trying to survive on very little. Now, during this time, obviously I was dealing with heartbreak and a lot of fear, a lot of internal fear of like, will anybody give me a chance? Will I have to move in with my parents in rural Minnesota, which that did not sound like a very exciting thing to do. In fact, to give you an idea of how determined I was to not go back to that life, I told myself that if I had to, I would move home with my parents. And that is not something I would ever really do ever.
But you weren't going back. Like
No.
When you said, "I'm done," the way that you talk about it almost sounds like someone who like quits drinking cold turkey.
Yeah. So February 5th, 2005, I saw my last client at a hotel in the Twin Cities. And he already knew, because even back then, sex work was very much on the internet. So there were boards that were kind of like Twitter, basically, but for sex work. And he knew I had put out a post that I was planning on retiring. But he didn't know that I was retiring that day. He had no idea. And he said, "I know that you're thinking about, quitting and I hope I can see you again. Can I see you again?" And I said, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no." But I knew the answer was no. I knew that when I checked out of that hotel, that I would never, ever check into a hotel with that intention ever again, And I remember so much about that day. Like I remember the weather, I remember the temperature, the weight at the scale at the gym, what I was wearing, all these random things, because it was such a significant moment of me deciding today is the last day. Not tomorrow, not a week from now, not a month from now. Today is the last day. And so during these months where I was cold calling for jobs, at any given time, I could have gone back and seen one client or 2 clients or 10 clients just to bring in some money, right? But even if nobody would know that I did that, I would know. So I didn't. And in April, I was in a rough place. I was still very heartbroken, very scared. The money was getting very low. So I called my mom. Now, my parents had no idea. And my dad didn't even find out until a couple of years ago.
That was your profession. They didn't know that.
They had no idea. So I called my mom and I told her, "Hey, look, there's some things you don't know and some things I'm going through I need to talk to you about." So it was a lot for my mom, kind of like you were blindsided. you thought you were going to have one conversation today, but you're going to have another. And my mom, she could have said a lot of things. She's very religious. She's a very good, godly woman. She could have said a lot of things, but all she said was, well, perhaps an ordinary life with a few extraordinary moments would be easier than an extraordinary life with no ordinary moments.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what, Mom? Yeah, I think so. I want an ordinary life. I want ordinary friends, ordinary boyfriend, ordinary job. Like, that sounds just absolutely amazing. How do I get that? Well, in April, or right at the end of April going into May, I started to get some traction. In fact, the city pages wanted to hire me, the Business Journal wanted to hire me, and the Star Tribune wanted to hire me. And everyone told me, well, if the Star Tribune wants you, you should go there. Like, that's where you want to be ultimately. And okay. So Star Tribune offers me a job, but then they give me some paperwork to fill out for HR. And you can imagine there was a question on that paperwork.
Have you ever been convicted of any crimes?
Yes, Kristi. And I'm not going to lie, right? Because that's not how I roll. So I checked yes. And I'm like, well, do I wait for them to like go figure out what the yes is and all these things, or do I try to get ahead of it? Because I have nothing to lose at this point. And I was down to $500, not even enough money to pay June rent. So let's just say I was pretty close to moving back home with Mom and Dad if I needed to, which I did not want to do. The hiring manager at the Star Tribune, her name was Patty Hannon, and very just like outgoing, strong, much like you actually, like a speaker, just kind of a leader, you know, whatever. And I left her a voicemail and I said, hey, you know, this is Chey. I tried to be as chipper as possible, right? This is Chey. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I did my drug test. I filled out the paperwork for you, but I wanted to give you a heads up that I had to check yes to having been convicted of a crime. It's a petty misdemeanor. It's not a big deal, but if you need me to address it, I'd be happy to. And I waited for her to call me back. Now, this is a woman that through this process called me back immediately, like within like 5 or 10 minutes. She'd always call me back. I heard nothing. And it went into the next day and I heard nothing. All day the next day, nothing. This is a woman that had been calling me back. Like, she had been on me, right? And I was like, this is it. This is it. I've come this far. And this little thing is going to keep me from getting this stupid job, you know, that I don't even want that much, really. But other side from the fact that I just want a job. And I went to the gym, the Minneapolis Lifetime, downtown Minneapolis. And sometimes the cell service is bad in that building. It's an older building. And I came out of the gym and there was no messages. Got in my car, drove back to St. Paul. I was driving across the Mississippi between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And a voicemail popped up from Patty. And I was like,
come on, like, Patty. Come on, like Patty.
5:30 on a Friday, you know? I listened to the voicemail and Patty just says, oh, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. She's like, something about my husband works for the BCA. I think she even said, I already know, or something odd like that. I don't know. And then she said, but we'll have to have drinks sometime. And I can tell you about all the stuff I did when I was young. Now, she never did tell me about the stuff she did when she was young, but, but she did hire me. And there are people that I met at the Star Tribune that are still my friends to this day. My best friend, Becky, we met at the Star Tribune in 2005. And so I met normal people and made normal friendships and had normal boyfriends. And
ordinary. You had ordinary relationships.
Yeah. So the next few years were actually some of the best years of my life. And I ended up getting a job with a tech company. A couple of the owners were in my business roundtable at the Minneapolis Lifetime Athletic Club. And they hired me on to work for them. And that was actually, being in tech was a pretty good fit for me, actually. So it kind of led to other things, but, so my flipping of the script didn't necessarily start from going from cab to limo. And how I got into cab is I got laid off from my job in 2009. And I was working at Chino Latino in Uptown as a server part-time. And I lost that job as well in late 2009. And unemployment wasn't going to be enough money. And so to give you an idea of my resolve of never going back, I was willing to drive a taxi or do whatever it was I had to do to bring in money so that I wouldn't be in a situation where I felt I had to do that again.
Because unlike many, many other jobs, you really could make one phone call and you're back in it. You could do it one time for some money. I mean, you didn't have to go through a big hiring process. You knew these people, you knew that they would take your call, and you could have had the job back.
Well, and actually, like on these internet boards for those chat rooms for that industry, I kind of when I closed that door, I really closed it. Like I didn't go on the chat rooms. I didn't associate with my friends from that life. Like it was cold turkey. Like anyone that had been in my life before February 5th, 2005, like suddenly was basically no longer in my life, because I felt if I stayed around that, it would just keep me kind of in that world. And a lot of people, including my clients, they were very supportive of my plan to move on and retire, but they all basically told me the same thing. You'll probably fail and it's okay, most do. Because a lot of girls who do try to get out, they don't ever really fully succeed. So people had the best of intentions and they would be like, it's okay, Chey, if you fail and have to come back. But I'm not most people. Like failure was never like an option on the table. And I knew that. And in these boards, people were talking about how much money they would pay if I would just come back for like a reunion tour. And guys were saying, oh, I'd pay triple her rate. You know, she could do a tour in Chicago and Minneapolis and these places. And, I would pay this much, right? And so
wow.
At any point, I could have gone back and done, say, a reunion tour or something and made crazy money, But again, like I fundamentally changed so much during that transformation year of 2005 that who I was by 2006 or 2007 or 2008, like that wasn't even something I could conceive of. Like I couldn't even imagine myself because I was so internally different, if that makes sense. The changes that I made weren't just my boyfriend, my job, my whatever, like they were internal changes as well.
So Chey, interesting that when you talk about being in that, you don't talk about it as if it was the worst time ever or you hated it or it was awful, but yet you wanted to get out of it and you were never going back. What about it now that you have clarity of time? Did having that experience in that industry make you who you are? Do you wish you could have gone back and never had those experiences? Because I think for many, many decades, that industry was completely locked down and full of tons of shame. And there's more and more people talking about it, how it started, why they were trapped, because to understand and to have empathy and compassion and not judgment means to talk about some of those things. And I know you're talking about it today, but I'm curious, when you look back on it, was it horrible? Again, would you do it again if you had to start over? I'm just, because I don't want to come from a place of judgment. I want to come from a place of understanding.
Well, I think there's a cost associated to certain things we do, and there are consequences to certain things. And I don't think, so initially, like I said, I got into it because I was in a place of hardship. So like the initial, wasn't necessarily like, I don't judge myself for that, because in that moment I was young, I was desperate, and it,
a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do.
Yeah, it was complicated, right? And I was probably actually harder on myself about that decision than I should have been for a long time. I'm no longer hard on myself for that, because now when I look back, I understand how I got to that place and how I ended up down that path. But I think doing that for a time, it allowed me to see things, there's the fantasy idea of sex work and of those types of things, right? And it allowed me to kind of see the cost people pay for participating in that, whether it's the client or whether it's the provider, that there's a cost that's paid. And
emotional, mental, that kind of cost.
All sorts of things. Like, for example, men that pay for play. You know what I've noticed over the years? Men who pay for play always pay a price eventually, some publicly, some privately, and some both. I've never seen one person, and I saw clients over many, many years, and some of which I know where they are in society today, right? Like, because I'm still in the same city, right? Hiding in plain sight, but just under a different name. And so everyone pays a price, even the client. And there are just certain things in life that, they say money made in vanity is always lost, or something like that. And that's why you never see a porn star or someone like that whoever like ends up with having a lot. Maybe you find out they died in a trailer park or something like that, right? So I just think like there are just certain things in life, maybe you know, I'm not going to judge people for doing them, but you have to be willing for that cost, or even in some cases consequences for those things. I wasn't willing for it. And I was willing to put in whatever effort or years I had to balance out the years that I did that. But trying to get from that to a new life is a very scary, difficult thing. And society, you probably have talked to people who've been to prison, whatever, like society labels people and makes it very difficult for them to re-enter society in an ordinary fashion, if you will.
And in every case, when we have talked with someone who has made a criminal background or something that is perceived societally, shame is associated with it, there's always someone who comes in and says, you know what, I'm going to give you a shot, or I love you anyway, or I love you in spite of, or because of, or that doesn't matter to me. You're more than your behavior or more than the action. And you had some of those people, because had you not gotten the Star Tribune and had your mother said, I can't believe it, you're going to hell, never talk to me again, you may not be where you are today mentally.
Yep. Yeah. And Patty Hannon, like there's that small act of just minimizing it and just making me feel somewhat better about it and saying, oh, it's no big deal, we've all done things, like just that small, it mattered. Like it was enough for me to even like face her and take the job, you know, even how she handled it.
And the fact that you were proactive about it is so important, because we've had people here at the company apply for positions. We ask them always, we're going to do a background check. Is there anything you want us to know? Because people do make mistakes. There are things that happen, and we're very forgiving, but we sort of don't want to be surprised if we find something out in a background check. And it's happened where we gave someone an opportunity and then they didn't tell us and we find it, and it's kind of a big thing. And the red flag isn't the action. It's like, why?
It's like the hiding it.
It's the hiding it.
Yes, absolutely. Because then you wonder what else they're hiding.
And will you keep hiding? And are you a liar? And will you be a good teammate? And will you be good with our clients? Because it requires proactive, intentional communication, which means a level of transparency. So that, I think the proactive piece of what you did with Patty and then what she reciprocated, it may have been different had you not ever come clean to her.
Well, and you work in PR, right? And people make mistakes and they need people to help them handle those mistakes. And oftentimes the story isn't in the mistake, but it's in how they handled it. Oftentimes,
how many fall to graces are there with celebrities and athletes and politicians, where if they would have just said, and you and I have had this conversation in your vehicle, what about this thing going on? Well, if they would have said this, I'm sorry, I'm getting treatment, I'm getting help, it's a whole different ending. It's the maybe if I say nothing, no one will notice, because people often find out.
Yeah, there are no secrets. And I truly believe that who we are in secret is who we really are. And so even if you think, you know what, I can do this and no one will know, problem is even you will know, right? You will know. And everyone will find out eventually. There are no secrets forever. And again, both in that profession and in my current profession, there's a lot of parallels. I see people at their worst. I see people at their most intimate. And I've seen enough people and enough things play out to know that things that happen in secret never stay secret.
And you said it earlier, there's always a cost.
Yep.
We're going to talk about Chey's current role as a business owner and the parallels between her careers right after this. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, an agency specializing in earned, owned, and paid media. With clients all over North America, Media Minefield was founded on the belief every story has value, and the power of a story is unlocked when it's shared. Oh yeah, Media Minefield's my favorite agency because I started it in 2010 when my 12-year television news career ended. I won some Emmy Awards, got to tell some incredible stories, met some amazing people, and then I was laid off. And that's enough of my Flip Your Script story. You can hear it and others by subscribing to the podcast. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate and review. And now back to today's guest. So we learned about Chey's flip your script story that hasn't been talked about before. And before we talk about what she's doing now, I do want to ask her a couple more things. So Chey, why did you decide to talk about this? Because you would have never, ever had to talk about this. And I know that your heart is to help people with your story. Tell me why you decided this is the time and this is the platform.
Well, and I told you how, like, I changed fundamentally in 2005, right? During that transition, like who I was on the inside. And even interestingly enough, it reflected on my outside physical appearance too. I almost looked different physically coming out of that than I did before going in. And I'm not sure why that happens, but during the pandemic, I feel like I went through a lot of internal shifts and changes and transformations too. And I also like aggressively aged in the pandemic. So I feel like I physically look different coming out of the pandemic too.
Didn't we all? Didn't we all?
Right. And so obviously the pandemic affected everyone differently. Some people weren't really affected. Their lives actually got easier in the pandemic. Other people, you know, like our business was down almost 100%. I mean, that's like practically unsurvivable. But you asked why now? So it's a series of things. I found that a lot of things have come full circle for me, interestingly enough. And a lot of stories from back then are suddenly almost intersecting to now. A lot of things that I experienced and witnessed, even say Minneapolis and St. Paul police departments. I had lots of intimate encounters with both police departments. And I can speak very intimately, I know I keep using that word with a little pun intended, but I can speak very intimately to the different policing methods of both cities. They're very, very different. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I respect one police department more than I respect the other.
Yes.
And there's very good history there as to why. So one police department has a lot of great will with me that will carry through the decades. Another police department does not. So there's some of that, right? Like I can talk about things, but people might think I'm just saying things, right? They don't know that it's coming from a place of actual experience. But during the pandemic too, like there were a few moments of when you're in your 20s, you look up to women that are older, right? Wow, she's a really impressive CEO. I want to be like her. Like, you have all these women that you look up to. And in the last few years, I suddenly have like 20 something girls telling me that they've been watching me and looking up to me, which I never thought anybody would ever look up to a limo driver. Like that just seems, why would you look up to a limo driver? I'm not a CEO or an actress or something like that. And that's made me a little bit more aware of my example and a little bit more aware of a responsibility. I've even had clients like teenage daughters and young girls like say, oh, my daughters, they love your Twitter and they look up to you. And I'm like, what? They shouldn't be on my Twitter. My Twitter is not fit for children. What are they doing? Get them off my Twitter immediately.
What kind of parent are you?
Yeah, right. And then that makes me nervous because I'm like, oh crap, there might be kids watching me. Like, I really have to behave, right? And then I had a client that knows about my history and who's been my client for a long time. And she casually said something in the car, and I've been chewing on it for quite some time. She said something to the effect of that I was hoarding my life experience by not coming out of the closet with my entire experience in life. And I wasn't trying to hoard anything, and I'm not hiding in the closet. My friends know, my family knows, significant partners know, some of my clients know. So it's not like it's a secret. It's not like I'm hiding in the closet, not living my true self or something, but I knew what she meant. And so I just kind of felt, even though it's kind of the worst time to come out, if you will, because people are probably way more judgmental than they've ever been. It's a very sensitive time in society. But I also felt like it was time in other ways. And then when I was kind of reading the nature of your podcast, which you talked about your podcast before, but then I went and listened to a couple of the interviews and I realized, my flipping of the script, it began way earlier than changing from being a cab driver to owning a car service. Like truly the flipping of the script story is, the not so Hollywood story it began in 2005. And when I found myself like being on unemployment and feeling like that wasn't enough money in 2009, I was like very afraid of like, even though I knew I wasn't going to go back to old ways, I felt financially vulnerable. And that's what led me down that path in the first place. And I was willing to do anything for money but that. And I made a joke about driving a taxi, and somebody said, well, why would you drive a taxi? But at the time I knew of somebody secretly driving a taxi, and they were having like crazy adventures and making really good money. And they're kind of like, at the time, like locally famous. And they were secretly driving a taxi. And so I was intrigued. So I thought, well, why couldn't I drive a taxi? It couldn't be that hard. If you can find the airport and take a credit card and keep your car clean, people are going to be pretty thrilled. Just execute on the basics with consistency. So I went to go rent a taxi, and they wouldn't rent to me because I was a woman. And I'm like, this is 2009. I could sue you. You could
in a metropolitan area.
Oh yeah, not just one taxi company, but two. And and I was like, what in the world? And then the one taxi company said, well, we can't rent to you because you've never been a taxi driver before, and our insurance requires you to have some experience. So if you go to this taxi garage over here, they have a different insurance, and they can put first-time drivers on their insurance. So I went to that taxi garage, and it was owned by a group of individuals that I know to this day. And they're like a bunch of dads to me. They're like my dad's age. And they wouldn't rent to me because I was a woman.
What's happening?
Yeah. So somebody called on my behalf and said, you really need to give Chey a taxi. Like, she'll take good care of your taxi. You guys are desperate for drivers, because the taxi industry doesn't make money off of people calling for taxis. They make money off of people like Chey paying $500 or $600 a week to rent the taxi. So they gave me a taxi that was burning a quart of oil a day. And their hope was, now this was a garbage taxi. It needed to go to the junkyard for like $500. And what I was going to pay in lease that week was more than the taxi was worth. And what they were hoping was that I would burn up the engine by not knowing it was burning oil, and they could charge me $2,500 for the engine. But
no, what's happening? Come on, guys, get it together. That's not okay.
Well, the taxi industry, had a deservable reputation for being somewhat shady and predatory, much like Uber, but in a different way. So I came back a week later, and that car was so filthy, I went to put a dog in it. And it was awful. And it didn't matter how much I cleaned it. It was horrible. And I paid my lease in full, and I gave them a receipt for oil. I said, just so you know, this car is burning a quart of oil a day. You might want to look into this. And so you had 3 Egyptian men leaning over the car, looking at the dipstick in confusion, because they were fully expecting me to blow up the engine. And I didn't.
Messing with the wrong lady.
Yeah. And so it kind of became like, okay, now I'm going to prove to you that women can drive taxi, and we can be better than any of the guys. And there's a reason why people don't want to drive taxi. There's a reason why taxi driving is dangerous, and why we don't see women taxi drivers. It was much more dangerous than even I expected.
More dangerous than your previous? More dangerous than when you were...
So, yes, absolutely.
Now, isn't that interesting?
Yes, much more abusive and much more physically dangerous. Now, keep in mind, too, though, I was privileged in my previous, because I was sort of at the top of my profession, and I could screen guys, and I had a wait list of like 6 months if you wanted to be a new client. I could profile guys by clients by when I had a request form on my website, and I could profile guys based on which questions they chose to answer and which questions they chose not to answer. And then I'd have a little part where it'd be like, tell me about yourself. And then I could tell a lot about the man by what he said or didn't say. And so I was so good at screening clients that I didn't have to worry really about my safety, at least in the later years.
But the early years, when you're starting out in that business, but still, yeah. The stuff that happens in a taxi the
taxi was much more abusive and much more physically dangerous by 1,000-fold. Like, it wasn't even close. Wasn't even comparable. I had my first gun pulled on me in my taxi on the west side of St. Paul, the west side neighborhood, not West St. Paul, like the 600 block of Oakdale, 3 weeks in. And that was really scary. Like, I was like, okay, this is real. Like, okay, this danger is not just be safe out there, taxi drivers. Like, no, this is real. So, yeah.
And you then transitioned into having the service that you have now. And if you're listening and you need a service, there's no one better out there than Chey. I'm telling you, it's pretty amazing. And if right now a young woman, say a 20-year-old woman, gets in the back of your vehicle and tells you that she is new in the sex industry, what advice would you give her?
Well, so as a cab driver, I actually saw a lot of sex workers.
Yeah, I bet you
Now
did.
the ones I see are more the kind that you don't know are sex workers. They have PhDs and MBAs. They wear suits. They ride on the corporate jet, and they build a company for 20 grand for a consulting fee. So that's a whole different, the kind that I see now, I don't necessarily know they are what they are. So in that industry, the less you look like what you are, probably the higher ranking you are, if you will. But in my taxi days, I did see a lot of dancers and sex workers and things like that. And I would be kind of what you would consider, like, I'm not very motherly, like overall, but I was probably very motherly with those customers and much more protective, because I sort of understood the world in which they, even if they didn't know that I had a history in it, I understood their world better than they realized I did. And so I was very protective and watched over them. I didn't necessarily give them advice specifically on that. But I mean, there was one dancer I used to drive in Inver Grove Heights. Her boyfriend committed a murder on the east side of St. Paul, and she left the scene of the murder in my taxi. And I kind of like helped her see through those times, because she was charged with felony aiding and abetting and lying in a murder investigation. She overslept. She got bailed out by one of her clients, and she overslept a very important felony court appearance. And so I basically broke into her house and woke her up and got her dressed and got her down to the courthouse, so that
that's going above and beyond, Chey. That really is. So
I did that more so than advice,
help and the person that's there to say, like Patty was for you. It's okay. If you, from your story and from the part of the story that you haven't shared before that you talked about today, what do you want people to get out of it? Do you want them to, because there's many things that could be like the main message or the one thing. Is the one thing that, is it about judgment? Is it about that if you want to go a different direction with your life, you can? Is it courage? Is it vulnerability? What's the thing that you hope people get?
Well, I think, during the pandemic, for different reasons, people have they've maybe their first, weathering their first storms, right? Or maybe people have had to pivot and change careers or whatever it might be. And, fears for different people look different. In my case, it was the fear of a gap on my resume and of a criminal record, but everybody has fears of, like, I don't know if I could really do that, or I don't really know. Everyone has their fears and insecurities. And even when you can't see the forest through the trees, just keep going. Like, there was something I had in my fridge during those early months of 2005. And there were some days that I could barely get out of bed because I cried all day, right? And out of heartbreak and fear. But there was a thing on my fridge that just said, do one thing every day in the direction of your dream. And at that time, I didn't necessarily have a dream, but my dream was to get a job. That wasn't that. And so some days I would see that. I'd go to the fridge and I'd see that. And I'd force myself to, like, stop crying or whatever, feeling sorry for myself or whatever. And I would make that one cold call, or I'd send that one email. And I would make myself do something every day, even if it was the only thing I did. And I think sometimes it's easy to, like, give up when it gets dark, or to think that doors won't open. But what I've learned is, if you in private make the internal commitment and changes and choices, whatever it might be, and you make sure you close the door to your past, whatever that might be. It doesn't have to be as serious as, say, my situation. Other doors will open. But if you leave a door open, that door, the past, whatever it is, the other doors are less likely to open for you, I feel.
So to move forward really means cutting ties with whatever it is that's holding you back.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you do, Chey? I'm sure this has happened when you pull up to someone's house in your beautiful vehicle and you're 15 minutes early, because you always are, and you're standing out there ready to open the door, and up comes a lovely couple going out for anniversary dinner, and you recognize the man from 2003. What do you do? Because that has to have happened.
That specifically has not happened. and this is going to sound weird, but I feel like when you do what's right, the universe protects you. I know that sounds silly, but the universe has really protected me, like more so than I deserve, more so than I deserve. And so I don't know. That specific thing that hasn't happened. And I also really wiped my hard drive clean. It's hard to explain that. I don't mean my physical hard drive for the computer I used during those years. I don't mean that. But there was kind of like a hard drive that got wiped when I made those changes, that there might be some people that I wouldn't recognize at this point. So many names and faces I've forgotten. There's been a couple of times where people from that time have, like, say, seen me on the front page of the Star Tribune and suddenly found my business and called me. And I remember once going to see one of those individuals who used to be my client in those years, and I pulled over and puked in Maple Grove on the side of the road because I didn't want to pick him up. And it was nothing personal to him. It's just that I'm such a different person now. Not only am I different, I'm older, I'm 150 pounds heavier, like whatever. Like I'm not even the same person physically or otherwise, right? And I drove him a couple of times, and on like the third drive, and thankfully it was always spaced out by like a year. So I didn't have to like drive him regularly. It's no offense to him. He's a very nice man, but I just wasn't comfortable. And he said to me on the third drive, he said, I get the impression, because he liked to kind of like relive the memories of those days or whatever. He goes, I get the impression that you've really moved on with your life and you're not really comfortable reminiscing. And I said, yeah. I said, honestly, I don't even remember some of those things. Like, I apologize. It's not personal. And I think he really finally, by the third ride, like he got it. So that's only happened a couple of times. But again, like, I feel like the universe, again, has protected me somewhat from that. I don't know how, because think about all the people I know, right? And think about even just
everybody.
Like, yeah, it's almost getting kind of like, I'm like, I have to behave because my world has become so small. So considering how, especially like how small my world has become, it's amazing how protected I have been. There was one time at the Star Tribune where my past like came back to bite me. I had called on a local hotel that I had worked at quite a bit. So I knew their business very intimately. And apparently people before me had called on this hotel and never gotten any traction. And I had one conversation with this manager and got traction off of one phone call. And then I went to go meet him, and he got really weird during the meeting and like abruptly left, and then called Patty, my manager, and was like, I went to meet with your person and my staff said, don't you know who she is? Because keep in mind, this is only like a year removed from that life, right? And so he was very like embarrassed, which I feel bad for him. And Patty covered for me. She like totally had my back. She said, I'll call on this account from now on. She goes, whatever you did got traction though. No one else has had any success. So I don't know what you said, but we're in with them now. And she covered for me. Like, she had my back in that moment. And that was a very humiliating, embarrassing, like, I'm sure more so for him, but horribly embarrassing for me. But really, that's been the only like really bad, in all these years, 17 years. That's a lot of years hiding in the same city in plain sight, if you will. So that's the other thing people should know, is that you can have a fresh start. The universe will provide, so to speak. Like, if you do what you need to do and you do what's right and who you really are in secret is who you really are, like, people will sense that about you, and you'll be fine. So go ahead, make those changes, whatever it might be, you'll be fine. That'd be my advice.
I think what's fascinating, Chey, is that before sharing your whole story, people knew you, and you said that young women would say, I really look up to her. I admire someone who has made a go of it in a male-dominated industry and succeeded and achieved the level of notoriety that you have in the industry that you're in. And you've driven around some very, very famous people, and they come here so that you can drive them because you're so good at what you do. And I suspect that after doing this, and this gets out there, more people will say, I admire you, Chey, because you're being authentic and you want to help people with your story. And there's no greater courage, the amount of courage it takes to do that. So I want to applaud you and thank you for trusting me to tell it here and to give it the kind of space that it deserves, because I think that more people are going to say, boy, I admire that. And perhaps it will allow other people to open the door on the path, maybe open a window because we're going to keep the door closed, but maybe open a window, look at it, see it for what it is, and share their story to other people so that they can help them. So I think you don't know the kind of impact that you have. And I want to make a very intentional motion of gratitude that you shared it and felt this was a safe space to do it, because it will help people.
Yeah. And when I see younger women like saying that they look up to me and stuff, that's just weird. It's a new place for me to be in. And it also is like, okay, well, maybe you need to grow up and a little bit in certain ways. Like we all need to have growth and, and so I don't know. I think that kind of has also kind of woken me up to just kind of reflecting on, and I've realized too, like, there is a lot even just now, like today, like in my day-to-day, that like does kind of circle back to those initial experiences and skills that were developed. Sometimes so we have a couple of affiliates that are global and national that will send work my way when they have powerful people coming into Minnesota. And what I've heard on several occasions is, oh, we like to send our most difficult people to you because you can handle them. And when they say most difficult, it's usually like a rich, powerful male who's not a nice person. And one person asked me, they said, "You're very good with so-and-so. He doesn't like anybody, but he loves you. Like, what's your secret?" And between you and me, I'll tell you what, I've seen rich, powerful men without their suits on, and they're all the same. They...
Quote of the day. There it is.
They do not intimidate me whatsoever. And what I found is those men, usually people respond to them in one of two ways, particularly in service industry roles like myself, third, fourth class citizen roles such as myself. People in roles such as myself, we either do one of two things. We either shake in fear because they're so mean and intimidating or whatever, or we like kiss up to them in a very insincere way, right? And I don't do either. I don't kiss up to them and I don't shake in fear. In fact, I stand toe to toe to them, and sometimes will even like assert some dominance of like, "Thou shalt not treat me that way." And I won't say that, but I will like stand up to them. And in a way, that's their love language. They don't get that enough. And when they do get it, they absolutely respect it and love it.
It's demanding and fighting for your worth.
I guess, yeah.
Because you don't deserve to be treated like a third or fourth class citizen. And the kissing of, the brown nosing kind of bit, that must be exhausting to be around that all the time. And you see these folks, celebrities and politicians and named folks that are just surrounded by yes people because they make such terrible decisions. Certainly if they were surrounded by people who actually cared for them, would be like, maybe Aaron Rodgers, perhaps we shouldn't say this, just as for example.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, we went a lot of different directions there. If you could go back and change the whole thing, would you change the whole thing? Or are you grateful for the experiences you had because they made you the strong, powerful, admirable woman you are today?
Well, it's complicated because in the pandemic, I really fantasized about what if I had stayed in tech and had a wonderful work from home job and could get 8 hours of sleep a night and have pension and benefits, or, well, not say pension, but they don't really exist anymore, but benefits and healthcare and all those things you don't have when you're a small business owner. And that all sounded really wonderful. But I've also had like a really rich and extraordinary experience over the last, well, now 12 years, both driving taxi and driving limo. And I have this whole network of amazing people. Like, for example, my docket app wasn't working because the Minnesota Department of Health had one of my digits of my phone number that was off or something. And so one of my clients saw a tweet on Twitter, I was having trouble with my docket app. And she said, "Do you want me to log into the system and update your phone number? If I have your permission, I can do it." And I said, "That would be great." And she did. And now my docket app works, like, so yes, do I wish I had a wonderful work from home job with benefits and security and I could get 8 hours of sleep a night? Oh, absolutely. but I also like have met extraordinary people over the last decade. I've compiled all sorts of data on humanity. I've tracked elections, tracked the economy. People have trusted me with their stories. And so I know the secrets of the city. Like, people will trust me with some of the biggest secrets that we have here in Minnesota. And so it's like, well, I'm trading one thing for another, right? Like, it's been a really rich and wonderful decade. It hasn't always been easy, but I don't have any regrets aside from being able to work from home.
You have an ordinary life with extraordinary moments, which is just what you wanted, right?
Right. Right.
What Mama wanted, I guess.
Right,
so
right.
you've said a few different quotes throughout. Did you have another quote to end the episode with, as we often do?
Well, and I knew you were going to ask that, but then I dropped in some of the more important ones. You know what I mean? As we kind of went through, because I am big on quotes. Like, there are quotes that do influence me, and I think we actually covered most of them as we went along.
I love that they just kind of naturally came up as we were talking about them. I appreciate you sharing your story. I thank you, Chey. I look forward to the next time that I'm with you, because I used to, before I met Chey, I would intentionally schedule calls and meetings during the ride from my house to the airport, because I just it was a time to work. That's why I didn't drive myself, so I could work. But now I don't, so that I can talk to Chey, because there is something magical that happens in your space. And it is this: you protect the stories, you share the stories, and you've done some things, you've talked to some people, and I love our time together.
Well, thank you, Kristi.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chey. Chey didn't have a final quote, but I actually wrote one down. It's from Brene Brown. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. I just encourage folks, share your story, no matter what it is. And these little decisions that you make, big changes can happen. As Chey said, keep on the path. My hope is Chey's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Kristi Piehl and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share our episodes with your family and friends. Do you or someone you know have a story about flipping your script? We'd love to share it. Contact us on our website, flipyourscriptpodcast.com. To stay up to date on all things Flip Your Script, make sure to follow host Kristi Piehl on social media. You can also check out the website for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and other great episodes.